Dear students, I welcome you to yet another lecture on corporate law. The topic of discussion for today's lecture is corporate social responsibility. In this lecture, we shall try and understand the meaning of the term corporate social responsibility. We shall also trace the historical evolution of the concept of corporate social responsibility. We shall also discuss corporate social responsibility in the Indian context. Corporate social responsibility is the way companies manage their businesses to produce an overall positive impact on society through economic, environmental, and social actions. Corporate social responsibility, CSR in short, is also called corporate conscience, corporate citizenship, social performance, or sustainable responsible business. It is basically a key to reduce investment risks and maximize profits by taking all the stakeholders into confidence. Dear students, we now come to the definition of CSR. One of the challenges of examining the concept of CSR is identifying a consistent and sensible definition from among a bewildering range of concepts and definitions that have been proposed in literature. A variety of definitions of CSR have been proposed, but a fundamental problem in the field of CSR is that no clear, universally accepted definition of the concept is given, and there is no overall agreement or consensus in the ideal meaning of CSR, making theoretical development and measurement difficult. The initial definition of CSR was given by Howard R. Bowen during 1950s in his book entitled Social Responsibilities of the Businessman, in which he defined social responsibility as, and I quote, obligations of businessmen to pursue those policies, to make those decisions, or to follow those lines of action which are desirable in terms of the objectives and values of our society, unquote. According to the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, corporate social responsibility is defined as a business management concept whereby companies integrate social and environmental concerns in their business operations and interactions with their stakeholders. CSR is generally understood as being the way through which a company achieves a balance of economic, environmental, and social imperatives while at the same time addressing the expectations of the shareholders and stakeholders. The Commission of the European Communities in 2002 proposed the definition of CSR as, I quote, corporate social responsibility is about companies having responsibilities and taking actions beyond their legal obligations and economic or business aims. These wider responsibilities cover a range of areas but are frequently summed up as social and environmental, where social means society broadly defined rather than simply social policy issues. This can be summed up as a triple bottom line approach, that is, economic, social, and environmental. According to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, CSR is the ethical behavior of a company towards society, management, acting responsibly in its relationship with other stakeholders who have a legitimate interest in the business, and it is a commitment by business to behave ethically and contribute to economic development while improving the quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the local community and society at large. Wayne Weiser uses CSR in developing countries to represent the formal and informal ways in which business makes a contribution to improving the governance, social, ethical, labor, and environmental conditions of the developing countries while remaining sensitive to the prevailing religious, historical, and cultural contexts in which they operate. While there is no universal definition of corporate social responsibility, it generally refers to transparent business practices that are based on ethical values, compliance with legal requirements, and respect for people, communities, and the environment. Thus, beyond making profits, companies are responsible for the totality of their impact on people and the planet. People constitute the company's stakeholders. Its employees, customers, business partners, investors, suppliers and vendors, the government and the community. Increasingly, stakeholders expect that companies should be more environmentally and socially responsible in conducting their business. In the business community, CSR is alternately referred to as corporate citizenship, which essentially means that a company should be a good neighbor within its host community. Dear students, we now trace the historical evolution of the concept of CSR. The concept of CSR is not new and found its origin in ancient Mesopotamia around 1700 BC. King Hammurabi introduced a code in which builders, innkeepers or farmers were put to death if their negligence caused the death of others or major inconvenience to local citizens. In ancient Rome, senators grumbled about the failure of businesses to contribute sufficient taxes to fund their military campaigns. In 1622, disgruntled shareholders in the Dutch East India Company started issuing pamphlets complaining about management secrecy and self-enrichment. In 1790, there was a first large-scale consumer boycott in England, which finally forced importers to adopt free labour sourcing. Within a few years, more than 300,000 Britons were boycotting sugar, the major product of the British West Indian slave plantations. Nearly 400,000 signed petitions to Parliament demanding an end to the slave trade, and in 1792, the House of Commons became the first national legislative body in the world to vote to end the slave trade. In the 18th century, a Scottish philosopher and economist named Adam Smith wrote numerous articles on social responsibility, his magnum opus being an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, in which he expressed that the needs and desire of the society could best be met by the free interaction of the individuals and organizations in the marketplace. However, he also recognized that the marketplace participants must act honestly. With industrialization, the impacts of business on society and environment assumed an entirely new dimension. The corporate paternalists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries used some of their wealth to support philanthropic ventures. By the 1920s, discussions about social responsibilities of business had evolved into what we can recognize as the beginnings of modern CSR movement. By the start of the 20th century, powerful corporations suffered a backlash against their widespread exploitation. Labor unions were formed, giving a voice to the workers, and governments began to assume more responsibility for welfare and infrastructure, gradually introducing antitrust legislation. In the 1950s, emerging consumer powers saw companies start taking a new interest in the social and human aspects of their markets. It was at about this time scientists and environmentalists started noticing some worrying changes to the environment. Historians of corporate social responsibility generally agreed that the concept emerged in the 1930s and 1940s, but it formalized in 1953 with the publication of a book by Howard Bowen, who attempted to define CSR as social responsibility of businessmen and posed the question, what responsibility to society can business people be reasonably expected to assume? The late 1950s and 1960s saw a shift in attitudes towards government and business. Numerous legislations were enacted to regulate the conduct of businesses and to protect employees and consumers. For example, Textile Fiber Product Identification Act of 1958, Fair Packaging and Labelling Act of 1960, Equal Pay Act of 1963, National Traffic and Motor Safety Act of 1966, National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, Truth in the Lending Act of 1969, Clean Air Act of 1970, and so on. Moreover, an increasing number of consumer protests led to the creation of consumer rights movement that directly challenged corporate power. In 1970, most stockholders did not owe share in just one company, but held them in many companies to spread the risk. Therefore, they were not interested in maximization of profits in just one company at the possible expense of other companies in which they owned shares. In other words, owners of diversified portfolios would want to achieve social optimization through joint profit maximization and would want to spread social expenditure evenly over all firms to the point where marginal costs equal marginal appropriable benefits. Until 1975, many authors argued that the field of business and society still lacked a generally accepted theoretical paradigm and called for more tangible progress in conceptualization, research and policy development in CSR. And in the late 1970s, both the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and the United Nations Center on Transnational Corporations began developing codes of conduct in an attempt to control different aspects of corporate globalization. Continuous efforts were made to develop a model of corporate social responsibility by many researchers, and the first fruit of such effort was produced by Carroll in 1979 in the journal Academy of Management Review in an article titled Three-Dimensional Conceptual Model of Corporate Social Performance. The three aspects of the model address major questions of concern to academics and managers alike. Number one, what is included in corporate social responsibility? Number two, what are the social issues the organization must address? Number three, what is the organization's philosophy or mode of social responsiveness? The main contribution of his model was that the three-dimensional model does not treat the economic and social goals of corporations as incompatible trade-offs. The rise in anti-corporate activism over environmental and human rights issues made a shift in corporate attitudes towards social and environmental issues essential. The 70s and the 80s saw the major international boycott of companies investing in South Africa, notably the Barclays Bank and the Nestlé boycott over the company's aggressive milk formula marketing strategies in the global South. Until 1990s, CSR was generally limited to corporate philanthropy. It is from the early 1990s that enlarged concepts and practices of CSR have come to the force. 1990s were characterized by swift expansion of globalization following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. IT revolution increased economic productivity, while high levels of private investment in equity markets increased individual prosperity. As globalization intensified, environmental awareness and the emergence of responsible business practice brought about key developments such as the Brundtland Commission, the formation of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the United Nations Global Compact. In 1991, famous researcher Carroll redeveloped his framework of corporate social responsibility and divided it into 4 levels in the form of a pyramid, which are economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic responsibility. He summarized, the CSR firm should strive to make profit, obey the law, be ethical, and be a good corporate citizen. Most notably, in 1992 Earth Summit in Rio impeded the summit's aim of finding ways to halt the destruction of the natural environment and its resources. 48 companies were specifically formed to participate in and influence the summit's outcomes, particularly trying to shift towards voluntary reporting. The first company who actually published a social report was Ben & Jerry's in 1989, and the first major company was Shell in 1998. As the successor to GATT, the WTO, that is the World Trade Organization, came into being on January 1, 1995 to ensure that trade flows smoothly, predictably and freely as possible among member states. The WTO broadly introduced various corporate social responsibility initiatives among member nations affecting their export-import policies by imposing various environmental and social restrictions on goods. CSR was being concretely shaped by rigorous researches with receiving impetus from codes and principles issued by multilateral organizations. It was a decade when alternative themes such as corporate sustainability, corporate social performance, and triple bottom line themes were developed. In the late 90s, both the consumers and NGOs also became aware and started taking active participation in social responsibility practices adopted by companies. Dear students, we shall now discuss the benefits of corporate social responsibility. The first benefit of CSR is building a positive brand image. In today's digital era, companies that demonstrate corporate social responsibility are gaining exposure and praise for their involvements. A brand's reputation can only benefit from the good deeds it does in its community. Consumers feel good when they buy products and services from companies that are helping their community. Cruz, Colbert and Wheeler profess a key significance of corporate social responsibility for building a brand image. Thanks to the coordination of all stakeholders' needs, a reputation of a company as a responsible business improves. Through the legitimacy, companies can build value and achieve gains. The desire of the end consumers for guilt-free products might lead to a fall in sales of a company accused of unethical practice. A bad image of an entity can result even in boycotting its products. In addition, it is difficult to greenwash it. After consumers decide to boycott one company's products, most of them never go back to buying from it. Therefore, the best policy is to stay off the media radar by obeying the ethical rules from the start. The second benefit of CSR is customer loyalty. The one thing that every business wants is customer loyalty. Customer loyalty depends not only on what the services of the company are, but it also depends on how the customer views it. The customer will remain loyal and feel good about a company if it knows that the principles of the company align with theirs. If the business has a standard manufacturing process and ethical business standards, it is more likely to have loyal customers as compared to other companies. The approval of the local communities can also be easily won by socially responsible behavior and enable enterprises to operate unperturbed. CSR is also a means of distinguishing a business from others. Through presenting itself as a precursor of responsible attitude, a company can stand out of the crowd and thus induce customers into buying its products and supporting it in other ways. The third benefit of CSR is that communities provide the license to operate. Apart from internal drivers such as values and ethos, some of the key stakeholders that influence corporate behavior include governments through laws and regulations, investors and customers. A fourth and an increasingly important stakeholder is the community, and many companies have started realizing that the license to operate is no longer given by the governments alone, but communities that are impacted by a company's business operations. Thus, A robust CSR program that meets the aspirations of these communities not only provides them with the license to operate, but also to maintain the license, thereby precluding the trust deficit. The next advantage is attracting and retaining employees. Several human resource studies have linked a company's ability to attract, retain, and motivate employees with their CSR commitments. Interventions that encourage and enable employees to participate are shown to increase employee morale and a sense of belonging to the company. Perry and Towers also mention better motivation of employees as an effect of CSR. Workers are also a part of social responsibility, and as such, they are provoked to further activity, above all at their jobs. A company that boasts of a responsible behavior attracts new talents and retains good workers. Employees want to work for a company with good reputation. The organizational commitment of workers increases as a result of reforming labor practices and increasing protection of human rights. Number of sick days lowers, and thanks to training programs, the rate of work errors also decreases. Also, the employees' turnover decreases, which leads to savings on constant recruitment and training for new workers. Reducing the overtime causes less waste. Working for a longer time without break results in a higher rejection rate. Workers are tired and make more mistakes that could have been avoided, and in consequence, they spend more of their time on overtime hours on correcting the errors. This way, reducing overtime escalates productivity. The next benefit of CSR is increased creativity. CSR initiatives encourage employees to try new things and get re-energized about their jobs. Through this social involvement, employees feel empowered to start contributing to the bigger picture. They might come up with new ideas about products or internal processes, or innovate new problem-solving solutions. When a company demonstrates its values and passions through community giving, employees feel encouraged and supported to develop new and better ways to do their jobs. Dear students, we shall now discuss corporate social responsibility in India. Corporate social responsibility was introduced under Section 135 of the Companies Act 2013. Amongst the various provisions stated by the Act, the Government of India makes it mandatory for a particular class of profitable companies to contribute their share of profits for the cause of social activities through a dedicated procedure prescribed by the CSR rules and regulations. The CSR provisions within the Act are applicable to companies with an annual turnover of Rs 1,000 crores or more, or a net worth of Rs 500 crore or more, or a net profit of Rs 5 crore and more. The Act encourages companies to spend a minimum of 2% of their average net profits earned in the previous 3 years on CSR activities. The Act also requires such companies to constitute a corporate social responsibility committee. Dear students, we shall now discuss the constitution of the CSR committee. Minimum 3 directors are necessary to form a CSR committee. One amongst these directors must be an independent director. However, in unlisted public companies or private companies where an independent director is not required, their CSR committees can be without independent directors. In private companies which have only 2 directors, CSR committees shall have only 2 directors. In a foreign company, the CSR committee shall have at least 2 persons. Amongst these, 1 person shall be a resident of India who must be authorized to accept on behalf of such foreign company. The other person shall be nominated by the foreign company accordingly. Dear students, we shall now discuss the duties of the CSR committee. The duties of the CSR committee are: number 1, policy creation to implement the CSR activities according to Schedule 7 of the Companies Act 2013. Number 2, allocate and audit money for CSR activities. Number 3, oversee the execution of the CSR activities for which the money has been allocated so that it is not misused. Number 4, regular assessment of profits of the company and ensure that at least 2% of it is spent on CSR activities annually. The next duty is to issue an annual report on various CSR activities undertaken by the company. Another duty is to ensure local issues and regions are prioritized or promotion of local regions and people. Another duty of the CSR committee is to ensure that CSR policies are made public by issuing them on the company's official website in accordance with the format approved by the committee. Dear students, we shall now take a look at CSR activities as permitted under Schedule 7 of the Companies Act 2013. The various CSR activities under Schedule 7 according to Section 135 of the Companies Act 2013 and Companies Corporate Social Responsibility Policy Rules 2014 are eradicating hunger, poverty and malnutrition, promoting preventive health care and sanitation and making available safe drinking water, promoting livelihood enhancement projects as well as education and employment among children, women and the differently abled, promoting gender equality and empowerment of women, setting up orphanages, old age homes, daycare centers and other facilities for senior citizens, promoting measures for reducing inequalities faced by the SEBCs, OBCs, SCs and STs, providing proper hospital facilities and medicines at a subsidized rate and to improve the maternal health to reduce child mortality, providing hospital and dispensary facilities with a focus on proper sanitation in order to fight various health-related disease and issues like human immunodeficiency virus, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, malaria and other disease, ensuring sustainability and an ecological balance in the environment, safeguarding flora and fauna, animal welfare, agroforestry, conservation of natural resources and maintaining quality of the soil, air and water, enhancement of vocational skills by employment, protection of national heritage, art and culture by working towards restoration of historically important buildings and sites and promoting works of art, promotion and development of traditional Indian arts and handicrafts, introducing measures for welfare of veterans of armed forces, war widows and their dependents, training to promote rural or nationally recognized or Olympic sports, contribution to the PM's Natural Relief Fund or any other central government fund for the development of the socio-economic issues and SCs, STs, OBCs and minorities, contributing towards central government approved technology incubators within academic institutions like universities and colleges, development of slum and rural areas. Dear students, we now come to fines and penalties for non-compliance with the CSR provisions. Failure of a company to comply with CSR spending provisions or transferring and utilizing the unspent amount of the CSR funds, a company will be punishable with a fine which may increase to rupees 25 lakh rupees but not less than 50,000. The Act also provides for punishment of company officers who default in compliance. It states that every such officer of the company will be liable for a punishment with a fine which may increase to rupees 5 lakhs but not less than rupees 50,000 or an imprisonment for a maximum term of 3 years or with both. Dear students, this was all with regard to today's lecture on corporate social responsibility. In today's lecture, we tried to understand the meaning of the term corporate social responsibility. We also tried to understand the historical evolution of CSR. We also tried to understand the concept of CSR in India. Hope you have been able to understand the lecture fully. Thank you very much and stay blessed.